The wagon lurched to a stop outside the railroad camp, just as the sun began its descent behind the jagged peaks of the Idaho mountains. And Flora Kimball felt her heart drop into her stomach like a stone thrown down a well. She had been traveling for 3 days now, her wrists raw from the rope that bound them, her dignity stripped away piece by piece with every mile that separated her from the life she once knew. The man who had purchased her father's debt sat beside her on the wagon bench, a tobacco-stained merchant named Horace Guffman who smelled of whiskey and sweat. He had not touched her beyond shoving her into the wagon, but his eyes promised things that made her skin crawl. "This here's your new home, girl," Guffman said, gesturing toward the sprawling camp of tents and rough-hewn structures that served the Union Pacific Railroad crew. "You will work hard, keep your mouth shut, and maybe you will live long enough to see your daddy's debt paid off. 5 years, give or take. 5 years. Flora was 22 years old, and 5 years might as well have been a lifetime. Her father had died 6 months ago, leaving behind nothing but gambling debts and a daughter who had no legal standing to refuse payment. The law in 1877 Idaho Territory was simple and brutal. Debts were paid, one way or another. The camp was alive with movement as workers finished their day's labor. Men covered in dust and grime moved between the tents, their voices carrying across the cold October air. Some laughed, some argued, but all of them turned to look when Guffman climbed down from the wagon and yanked Flora after him. She stumbled, her legs weak from the journey, but managed to keep her feet. Her dress was torn at the hem, her hair a tangled mess beneath her bonnet, but she kept her chin up. Whatever was about to happen, she would face it standing. "Let me see what you brought," a voice called out. A large man with a thick beard and arms like tree trunks approached them. He wore a foreman's hat and carried a leather notebook. "We are running short on cooks since the last one ran off. She can cook, clean, and do whatever else you need," Guffman said, pulling a folded paper from his coat pocket. "Contract says she works until the debt is cleared. 5 years or $2,000, whichever comes first." $2,000. Flora's knees nearly buckled. Her father's gambling had been worse than she thought. The foreman took the paper and squinted at it in the fading light. "She looks half-starved. Can she handle the work?" "She is stronger than she looks. Her ma was a farm woman before she passed." It was true. Flora had spent her childhood working alongside her mother on their small farm near Shoshone, Idaho, before illness had taken her mother when Flora was 15. After that, it had been just her and her father, and she had watched helplessly as grief drove him to the card tables and whiskey bottles that eventually destroyed him. "Put her in the cook tent," the foreman said finally. "She starts before dawn. If she cannot keep up, we will find other uses for her." The way he said it made Flora's blood run cold. Guffman pocketed his payment from the foreman and tipped his hat to Flora with a mock bow. "Pleasure doing business. Try not to die too quick, girl. I have got a reputation to maintain." Then he was gone, climbing back onto his wagon and snapping the reins. Flora watched him disappear down the rutted road toward Shoshone, taking with him the last connection to her old life. "Come on," the foreman said, gesturing toward a large tent near the center of camp. "Name is Pike. You do what I say when I say it, and we will get along fine. You give me trouble and I will make sure you regret it. Clear?" "Yes, sir," Flora said quietly. Pike grunted and led her through the camp. Men stopped what they were doing to stare as she passed. Some looked at her with pity, others with interest that made her want to wrap her arms around herself. She kept her eyes forward and her steps steady. The cook tent was larger than she expected, with a wood stove at one end and tables for food preparation running down the middle. Sacks of flour, beans, and dried meat were stacked along the canvas walls. A woman in her 50s with iron-gray hair looked up from where she was stirring a massive pot of stew. "This is Martha," Pike said. "She will show you the ropes. You answer to her and to me. Anyone else gives you trouble, you report it. I do not tolerate fighting in my camp. Understood?" "Yes, sir." Pike left without another word. Martha studied Flora with sharp blue eyes that seemed to see everything. "You eaten today?" Martha asked. "Not since morning." "Sit. I will get you something." The kindness in her voice nearly broke Flora's composure, but she swallowed hard and sat on a wooden stool near the stove. Martha ladled stew into a tin bowl and handed it to her along with a hunk of bread. "Thank you," Flora whispered. "Eat slow. Your stomach will not be used to heavy food if you have been traveling rough." Flora did as she was told, letting the hot stew warm her from the inside. It was simple fare, just beef and potatoes and onions, but it tasted better than anything she could remember. "What is your name?" Martha asked, returning to her stirring. "Flora Kimball." "Well, Flora Kimball, I will give you the straight truth. This is not an easy life. These men work 14 hours a day laying track, and they expect hot food waiting for them when they are done. We cook for about 60 men, 3 times a day. You will be up before dawn and not done until well past dark. Your hands will blister, your feet will ache, and you will fall into your bedroll too tired to dream. I understand. I doubt you do, but you will learn quick enough." Martha paused, her expression softening slightly. "But I run a clean operation. Any man who tries to lay hands on you gets reported to Pike, and Pike does not tolerate that nonsense. You are here to work, not to be entertainment. You remember that and stand firm, and you might just survive this." "I will work hard," Flora said. "I promise." "Good, because tomorrow morning you are going to prove it." That night, Flora slept on a cot in a small section of the cook tent partitioned off by a hanging blanket. It was not much, but it was private and relatively warm. She lay awake for a long time, listening to the sounds of the camp settling down for the night. Men's voices carried on the wind, along with the occasional burst of laughter or the mournful notes of a harmonica. She thought about her father, about the choices he had made that led her here. Part of her was angry at him for leaving her in such a desperate situation. But another part, the part that remembered him teaching her to ride a horse when she was 6, remembered him singing while he worked in the fields before her mother died. That part could only feel a hollow sadness. Before dawn, Martha shook her awake. Time to earn your keep. The work was exactly as brutal as Martha had promised. Flora spent the morning hauling water, chopping vegetables, and learning how to manage the temperamental wood stove. By the time the men came for breakfast, she was already exhausted, but there was no time to rest. 60 hungry railroad workers filed through the tent, and Flora and Martha worked in tandem to keep the biscuits, bacon, and gravy flowing. The men were rough and loud, but most of them were polite enough. They thanked Martha for the food, and a few nodded to Flora as they passed. One young man, barely older than Flora herself, even smiled at her. "New girl seems decent," he said to Martha. "She is a hard worker," Martha replied. "Now move along, Thomas. Others are waiting." As the breakfast rush finally slowed, Flora allowed herself a moment to lean against the table and catch her breath. Her back ached, her hands were red and tender from the hot water, and she had burned herself twice on the stove. But she had made it through her first meal service. "You did well," Martha said, which Flora was learning was high praise from the older woman. "Now we clean up and start preparing for the noon meal." The routine continued throughout the day. By the time evening came and the last of the dinner dishes were washed, Flora could barely keep her eyes open. She collapsed onto her cot without even removing her boots. The days blurred together after that. Wake before dawn, cook breakfast, clean, prepare lunch, cook lunch, clean, prepare dinner, cook dinner, clean, collapse. Flora's hands developed calluses, her arms grew stronger from hauling heavy pots and water buckets, and she learned the rhythm of the camp. Martha was a stern but fair teacher. She showed Flora how to stretch their supplies, how to make tough beef tender through slow cooking, how to bake bread in the temperamental camp oven. In return, Flora worked without complaint, even when her body screamed for rest. 3 weeks into her time at the camp, Flora was outside fetching water from the barrel when she heard the sound of horses approaching. She looked up to see a group of riders coming down from the mountains, their horses picking their way carefully over the rocky terrain. The lead rider sat tall in his saddle, his broad-brimmed hat pulled low against the afternoon sun. Even from a distance, Flora could tell he carried himself differently than the railroad workers. There was an easy confidence in the way he moved, a connection with his horse that spoke of years in the saddle. As the group drew closer, Flora found herself staring despite her better judgment. The lead rider appeared to be in his late 20s, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and a strong jaw shadowed with stubble. He wore typical cowboy attire, a worn leather vest over a blue shirt, dusty trousers, and scuffed boots with spurs that caught the light. The riders stopped near the supply tent, and several railroad workers hurried over to greet them. Flora quickly filled her buckets and turned to head back to the cook tent, but not before the lead rider's eyes found hers across the camp. For a moment, their gazes locked. His eyes were a striking gray-blue, like storm clouds over the mountains, and they held an intensity that made her breath catch. Then someone called his name, and the moment broke. "Dalton, good to see you, man." Flora hurried back to the cook tent, her heart beating faster than the heavy water buckets warranted. "Who are those men?" she asked Martha as she poured the water into the cooking pot. Martha glanced outside. "Ah, Dalton Shepherd and his crew. They are drovers, bring cattle through these parts on their way to the railhead. Good men for the most part. They usually stop here to trade for supplies and news before moving on." "Dalton Shepherd," Flora repeated softly. "Do not get any ideas," Martha warned. "Men like that are married to the trail. They do not settle down and they do not rescue damsels in distress." Flora felt her cheeks heat. "I was not thinking anything of the sort. Good, because the last thing you need is complications." But as Flora went about her work preparing the evening meal, she found her thoughts drifting back to those storm cloud eyes and the way he had looked at her, like he was seeing her rather than just a cook tent worker. That evening, Pike invited Dalton and his men to eat with the railroad crew. It was not uncommon for travelers to share meals in exchange for news and stories from the trail. Flora found herself serving stew to the drovers, acutely aware of Dalton's presence at the table. "This is fine cooking," one of the drovers said, an older man with a weathered face and kind eyes. "Best we have had in weeks." "Thank you," Martha said, accepting the compliment with a nod. Flora kept her eyes down as she moved around the table, but she felt Dalton watching her. When she reached his spot, he spoke quietly. "What is your name?" She hesitated, then met his eyes. "Flora." "Flora," he repeated, as if testing the sound of it. "You are new here, a few weeks now. You do not seem like the type who belongs in a place like this." The observation was too accurate, too perceptive. Flora felt her defenses rise. Appearances can be deceiving, can they? His tone was gentle, not challenging. "What brings a woman like you to a railroad camp? That is none of your concern." She moved away before he could respond, but she felt his eyes following her for the rest of the meal. It made her nervous and warm in a way that had nothing to do with the heat from the cook stove. After the drovers left the tent, Martha pulled Flora aside. "That Dalton Shepherd was asking about you." Flora's heart skipped. What did he ask? Wanted to know your story. I told him it was not his business, but he is a persistent type. Just be careful. Like I said, complications are the last thing you need. But complications had a way of finding Flora whether she wanted them or not. The next morning, she woke to find Dalton standing outside the cook tent, leaning against a supply wagon and watching the camp come to life. When she emerged with 2 empty water buckets, he straightened. "Let me help you with those," he said, reaching for the buckets. "I can manage." "I am sure you can, but that does not mean you should have to." There was something in his tone, a respect mixed with genuine concern that made her hand over the buckets. Together they walked to the water barrel in the gray pre-dawn light. "You should not be here," Flora said quietly. "People will talk. Let them talk. I have never been one to worry much about gossip." "Maybe you can afford not to worry. I cannot." Dalton set the buckets down and turned to face her fully. "Flora, I do not know your story and you do not have to tell me. But I can see when someone is in a bad situation. If you need help, I do not need help from a stranger. Then let me be more than a stranger. Talk to me." Flora wanted to walk away to protect herself from whatever this was. But there was something in his eyes, a genuine warmth and concern that she had not seen in anyone since her father's death. Against her better judgment, she found herself speaking. "My father died owing debts. I was sold to pay them off. 5 years or $2,000. Dalton's jaw tightened, a flash of anger crossing his face. "That is not legal. It is here. The man who bought my father's debt had papers. I have no one to speak for me, no money of my own, so here I am. That is wrong. Wrong or not, it is my reality." Dalton was quiet for a moment, then he began filling the water buckets. "How much of the debt have you worked off?" "I do not know. They do not tell me. I just work and hope it is enough." "That is not how contracts work. You should know exactly how much you owe and how much you have earned. Without that information, they could keep you here forever." The thought had occurred to Flora more than once, but hearing it spoken aloud made it real and terrifying. "What can I do about it? Let me look into it. I know some people in Shoshone, including a lawyer who owes me a favor." "Maybe there is a way to know." Flora cut him off sharply. "I appreciate your concern, but I cannot accept your help. I do not know you, and I do not know what price might come with your assistance." Dalton looked hurt by the implication. "I do not want anything from you except to see you treated fairly." "Why? You do not know me. Why would you care?" He studied her face for a long moment. "Because the first time I saw you yesterday, carrying water like you are now, you had your head up and your shoulders back despite everything. You have not let this place break you. That kind of strength deserves respect, not exploitation." Flora felt tears prick at her eyes but forced them back. She could not afford to cry, could not afford to hope. Hope was dangerous. "I have to get back to work," she said, picking up the buckets. Dalton did not try to stop her, but as she walked away, he called after her. "My crew is staying for a few days while we rest the cattle. If you change your mind about that help, you know where to find me." Over the next 2 days, Flora tried to put Dalton Shepherd out of her mind. She focused on her work, on the endless cycle of cooking and cleaning that filled her days. But she found herself looking for him in the camp, and more often than not, she spotted him watching her from a distance. On the 3rd day, one of the railroad workers caused trouble during the lunch service. He was drunk despite it being barely noon, and when Flora served him his plate, he grabbed her wrist. "Why do not you sit with me a while, pretty girl?" he slurred. "Let go of me," Flora said firmly, trying to pull away. "Come on, just a little conversation. You can spare a few minutes for a lonely man." She said let go. The voice was low and dangerous, and Flora looked up to see Dalton standing behind the drunk worker. His hand rested on the man's shoulder, not threatening yet, but the promise of violence was clear in his stance. The worker looked up, saw Dalton's face, and immediately released Flora's wrist. "I did not mean nothing by it." "Then you should apologize." "I am sorry, miss. Too much whiskey, you understand." Flora nodded, her wrist aching where he had grabbed her. Dalton steered the man away from the cook tent, speaking to him in a low voice that Flora could not hear. A few minutes later, Pike arrived and escorted the drunk worker away, presumably to sleep it off. Dalton returned to the cook tent. "Are you all right?" "I am fine. Thank you for intervening." "He should not have touched you." Martha, who had witnessed the whole exchange, brought Flora a cool cloth for her wrist. "You have got yourself a defender," she said quietly to Flora. "He is just being decent. Maybe, or maybe he is sweet on you." The idea sent a flutter through Flora's chest that she tried to ignore. She could not afford to develop feelings for a man who would be riding out of her life in a matter of days. But that night, as she lay on her cot trying to sleep, all she could think about was the protective fury in Dalton's eyes when he saw that man grab her. The next afternoon, Dalton appeared at the cook tent with a folded piece of paper. Martha was in town buying supplies, leaving Flora alone to prep vegetables for dinner. "I rode into Shoshone this morning," Dalton said without preamble. "Talked to that lawyer I mentioned. He looked into your contract." Flora set down her knife, her heart pounding. "What did he find?" "It is worse than I thought. The interest rate on your father's debt is criminal, literally illegal under territorial law, and they are charging you for room and board at rates that mean you would never pay off the debt, even if you worked here for 50 years. The words hit Flora like a physical blow. She had suspected as much, but having it confirmed made it real. "So I am trapped here forever?" "Not necessarily. The lawyer says if we can get that contract in front of a judge, it will be thrown out. You would be free to go." "But getting it in front of a judge requires money I do not have." "I have money." Flora stared at him. "Why would you do that for me? You do not even know me." Dalton stepped closer, his eyes intense. "I know enough. I know you are brave and strong, and you deserve better than this. I know that every time I look at you, I see someone worth fighting for. And I know that in the 3 days I have known you, I have thought about you more than any woman I have ever met." Flora's breath caught. "You cannot mean that." "I do not say things I do not mean. But you are a drover. You said yourself you will be moving on in a few days. I am a drover who would stay if he had a reason to." The implication hung in the air between them. Flora wanted to believe him, wanted to hope that this could be real, but years of disappointment had taught her to be cautious. "Even if you could get my contract voided, where would I go? I have no family, no home, no money. At least here I have food and shelter. You would come with me, not as some obligation, but as my guest until you figure out what you want to do next. My family has a ranch about 50 miles north of here. My mother and sister are there. They would welcome you." "Dalton, that is too much. I cannot ask that of you or your family." "You are not asking. I am offering." Flora turned away, overwhelmed by the sudden possibility of freedom, of hope. "This is happening too fast. A week ago, I did not know you existed. Now you are talking about taking me away from here, about your family. It is too much." Dalton moved to stand beside her, not touching but close enough that she could feel the warmth of his presence. "I understand this is overwhelming, and I am not asking you to make any promises. All I am asking is that you let me help you get free of this place. What happens after that is entirely up to you. And if I say yes, when would this happen? Tomorrow. The lawyer can file the paperwork first thing in the morning. There will be a hearing, probably the next day. If the judge rules in your favor, you walk away free and clear." It was too good to be true, which meant it probably was. "And if he does not rule in my favor?" "Then I buy out your contract. $2,000, I have it." Flora spun to face him. That is a fortune. You cannot spend that kind of money on someone you barely know. I can and I will if I have to, but I do not think it will come to that. The lawyer seemed confident. Why? Why would you do this for me? Dalton reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand. His palm was rough with calluses, warm and solid. Because from the moment I saw you, something in me recognized something in you. Because I have spent my whole life on the move, never settling, never finding a reason to stay in one place. And then I met you, and suddenly I can think of 1,000 reasons to stop running. Flora's eyes filled with tears. I am afraid to believe you. Then do not believe my words. Believe my actions. Let me prove to you that I mean what I say. She looked down at their joined hands, at the way his thumb gently stroked across her knuckles. It would be so easy to say yes, to let this man sweep into her life and change everything. But easy was not always right. If I agree to this, I need you to understand something, Flora said slowly. I will not be obligated to you. If you help me get free, I will be grateful, but that does not mean I owe you anything. Not companionship, not affection, not anything beyond basic courtesy. Agreed. And if I decide to go my own way after this is done, you will respect that decision. Absolutely. Flora took a deep breath. Then yes, help me. The smile that spread across Dalton's face was brilliant and genuine. You will not regret this. I hope you are right. That evening, Dalton met with Pike to inform him of the legal action being taken. Flora was not present for the conversation, but she heard the foreman's raised voice echoing across the camp. An hour later, Pike stormed into the cook tent. You think you are clever, he snarled at Flora. Getting some cowboy to fight your battles. I have every right to question my contract, Flora said, forcing her voice to stay steady. You have the right to work off your debt like you agreed to. This is breach of contract, and I will see you in court. That is exactly what she wants, Martha said from her position by the stove. She had returned from town just in time to witness the confrontation. So you save your threats, Pike. The girl has got legal representation now, and there is nothing you can do about it. Pike glared at Martha, then turned back to Flora. You are not working in my camp tonight. Get out. You cannot throw her out without a ruling, Martha said. That would be unlawful dismissal, and you know it. Fine. She can stay tonight. But come morning, if she is not in this tent working, she is out on her ear. Contract or no contract. Pike stormed out. Flora sank onto a stool, her legs shaking. He is right. If the judge does not rule in my favor tomorrow, I will have nothing. You will have your freedom and your self-respect, Martha said firmly. That is more than most people have. And you will have that cowboy who is clearly smitten with you. I barely know him. Sometimes that does not matter. Sometimes you just know. Martha's expression softened. My husband and I, God rest his soul, we knew each other 3 days before we married. Had 30 good years together before he passed. So do not dismiss what is happening between you and that Dalton just because it is happening fast. What if he changes his mind? What if this is all some kind of game to him? Then you will survive, just like you have survived everything else. But I do not think that man is playing games. I have seen a lot of men in my time, and that one has got sincerity written all over him. Flora wanted to believe that. She wanted to trust in the possibility of something good happening in her life. But fear was a powerful thing, and she had been disappointed too many times. That night, Dalton came to the cook tent after the evening meal was finished. Martha made herself scarce, muttering something about checking the supply tent. Are you all right? Dalton asked. Pike did not hurt you, did he? Just threats. Martha stood up for me. Good, I like her. Dalton sat on one of the workbenches, his hat in his hands. I know today has been a lot. Are you having second thoughts? About 100 of them, Flora admitted, but I am still going through with it. That is all I can ask." He was quiet for a moment, then added, "You should know that whatever happens tomorrow, you have options. Even if somehow the contract stands, even if I have to buy it out, you are not alone in this anymore. It feels strange to have someone on my side. I have been alone for so long." "Well, you are not alone now." Flora looked at him, really looked at him, and saw nothing but honesty in his face. "Tell me about yourself. I am about to turn my life upside down based on your word, and I do not even know where you are from." Dalton smiled. "Fair enough. I am 27 years old. I was born in Texas, but my family moved to Idaho when I was 10 after my father died. My mother is tough as nails and raised me and my sister mostly on her own. Started working as a cowhand when I was 14, became a drover at 19. I have been moving cattle across 3 territories for the last 8 years. That sounds lonely. It can be, but it is also beautiful. There is something about being out on the open range under the stars that makes you feel free in a way you cannot really explain. I would like to feel that way someday. You will. I promise you that." They talked late into the night, sharing stories about their childhoods, their hopes, their fears. Flora learned that Dalton loved to read, that he carried a battered copy of Shakespeare's sonnets in his saddlebag, that he had once broken his arm falling off a horse when he was 12 and had been afraid to ride again, until his mother made him get back in the saddle the very next day, that his favorite meal was his mother's apple pie, and he had been searching for 8 years for a pie that tasted even half as good. In turn, Flora told him about her mother, about learning to bake bread at her side, about the garden they had grown together, about her father's slow decline after her mother's death, and the guilt she still carried for not being able to save him from himself. "It was not your job to save him," Dalton said gently. "You were his daughter, not his keeper. I know that in my head. My heart has not quite caught up yet. Give it time. Healing is not quick." When Martha finally returned to the tent, clearly having given them as much privacy as she could, Dalton stood reluctantly. "I should let you get some rest. Tomorrow is going to be a long day." "Dalton," Flora said as he reached the tent flap, "thank you for everything. Thank me when this is over and you are free." But Flora knew she would be grateful regardless of the outcome. For the first time in months she had hope, and that was worth more than she could express. The next morning dawned clear and cold. Flora dressed in her best dress, which was not saying much, and tried to calm her racing heart. Martha made her eat breakfast, though Flora could barely taste the food. "You will do fine," Martha assured her. "Just tell the truth. Judges can spot a lie from a mile away, and the truth is on your side." Dalton arrived with a wagon just after sunrise. His hair was freshly washed, and he wore a clean shirt and vest. He helped Flora into the wagon with a gentleness that made her heart flutter. The ride into Shoshone took about an hour. The town was small but bustling, with a main street lined with shops and businesses. The courthouse was a modest wooden building near the center of town. The lawyer, a middle-aged man named Richard Caldwell, met them on the steps. "Miss Kimball, I am glad to meet you. We have a strong case. Just answer the judge's questions honestly, and we should have you out of that contract by lunchtime." Inside the courtroom, Flora saw Pike and Horace Guffman, the man who had sold her contract to the railroad. Her stomach twisted, but Dalton's presence beside her gave her strength. The judge was a stern-looking man in his 60s with silver hair and sharp eyes. He reviewed the contract documents while everyone waited in tense silence. Finally, he spoke. "This is one of the most exploitative contracts I have seen in my 20 years on the bench. The interest rates alone are criminal, and the charges for room and board are outrageous. Miss Kimball, did you understand what you were signing when you agreed to this?" Flora stood, her voice shaking slightly. "I did not sign anything, Your Honor. My father died, and Mr. Guffman told me I was responsible for his debts. He said if I did not work them off, I would go to prison. I did not know I had any choice." The judge's eyes narrowed at Guffman. "Is this true? Did you coerce this woman into servitude without giving her proper legal counsel?" Guffman shifted uncomfortably. "The debt was legitimate. Her father signed. I am not asking about her father. I am asking about her. Did she have representation when she entered into this contract?" "Well, no, but. Mr. Guffman, Mr. Pike, this contract is void. Miss Kimball, you are free of all obligations. Furthermore, I am ordering these men to pay you wages for the time you worked at the railroad camp. 3 weeks at fair market rates for a camp cook comes to approximately $60. You will pay her before she leaves this courthouse." Pike started to protest, but the judge silenced him with a look. "Would you like to argue with me, Mr. Pike? Because I can also fine you for exploitation and false imprisonment if you prefer." Pike shut his mouth and pulled a leather purse from his coat. He counted out $60 with shaking hands and slapped the money on the table. "Give it to her," the judge ordered. Pike picked up the money and walked over to Flora. For a moment she thought he might refuse, but then he thrust the bills at her. "You will regret this." "That sounds like a threat," Dalton said quietly, standing up from his seat, "and I do not think the judge looks kindly on threats." "Everyone sit down," the judge said firmly. "Mr. Pike, Mr. Guffman, I strongly suggest you leave town and not return for a good long while. If I hear of you trying to collect debts in this manner again, I will have you arrested. Now get out of my courtroom." The two men left, and Flora stood holding the money, hardly able to believe it was over. She was free. Actually free. "Congratulations, Miss Kimball," the lawyer said, shaking her hand. "I am glad we could help." "Thank you so much," Flora whispered. Outside the courthouse, the reality of the situation hit her. She had $60, the clothes on her back, and nowhere to go. Dalton must have seen the panic in her eyes because he immediately took her hand. "Hey, it is all right. Remember what I said. You have options. I need to figure out what to do now. How about we start with lunch? There is a decent restaurant on Main Street. We can talk about what comes next over a proper meal." Flora nodded, grateful for the concrete plan. They walked down the street together, and Flora noticed people staring at them. She realized they must make an interesting pair, the rough cowboy and the woman in a worn dress clutching $60 like it was a treasure. The restaurant was warm and welcoming, with red checkered tablecloths and the smell of fresh bread. Dalton ordered them both steak dinners, and Flora tried not to cry at the simple kindness of it. "This is the first time in months I have eaten somewhere that was not the cook tent," she said. "Then we should make it memorable." They talked while they ate, and Flora found herself relaxing for the first time since her father's death. Dalton was easy to talk to, funny and thoughtful by turns. He asked her questions about what she wanted to do now, what dreams she had put aside. "I always wanted to have a garden again," Flora said. "Something big with vegetables and flowers. My mother and I used to spend hours working in our garden. It was peaceful. My mother has a garden at the ranch. It is a bit overgrown these days since she is getting older and cannot tend it like she used to. I bet she would love help with it." Flora hesitated. "Dalton, about your offer to go to your family's ranch. I have been thinking about it, and I do not want to impose on people who do not know me." "You would not be imposing. I already sent a telegram to my mother this morning, told her I was bringing a guest. She sent back a telegram that said, and I quote, 'About time you brought a nice girl home. Your sister and I cannot wait to meet her.'" Flora could not help but laugh. "You told your mother about me. I told her I met someone special and that you needed a place to stay for a while. She did not need more than that. And she just said yes. My mother believes in helping people. She took in half a dozen orphans during the war, found them homes, made sure they were cared for. Helping someone in need is just what she does. Flora felt tears prick at her eyes again. I do not know what to say. Say yes. Come to the ranch. Stay as long as you need to. Figure out what you want your life to look like. And if along the way you decide you might want me to be part of that life, well, I would be honored. But no pressure. Just a safe place to land. Flora looked into his storm cloud eyes and saw nothing but sincerity. This man had known her less than a week, and he was offering her everything she needed. It was overwhelming and terrifying and wonderful all at once. Yes, she said quietly, I will come to the ranch. Dalton's smile could have lit up the whole restaurant. You will not regret it. They spent the rest of the day in Shoshone, with Dalton insisting on buying Flora some practical clothes for the journey. She protested, but he was insistent. You cannot ride 50 miles in a dress. Trust me, you will be miserable. Besides, consider it a loan if it makes you feel better. You can pay me back from that $60. Flora finally agreed, and they visited the general store where she bought 2 pairs of trousers, 3 shirts, a warm coat, and a proper pair of boots. She changed in the back room of the store and emerged feeling like a different person. The trousers were comfortable and practical, the boots sturdy. You look good, Dalton said approvingly, like you were born to the frontier. I feel strange. I have never worn trousers before. You will get used to it, and they will keep you warmer on the trail. They returned to the railroad camp to collect Flora's few belongings and say goodbye to Martha. The older woman hugged Flora tightly. You take care of yourself, Martha said, and you take care of that cowboy too. He is a good one. I will. Thank you for everything, Martha. You made that place bearable. You made it bearable for me too, honey. It was nice having someone to talk to who did not smell like horse all the time. She pulled back and looked Flora in the eye. You deserve happiness. Do not be afraid to reach for it. With her belongings packed in a small bag, Flora climbed onto Dalton's horse behind him. It was not a big animal, a sturdy bay mare named Belle, but she was gentle and patient as Flora settled herself. Hold on tight, Dalton said. It is a long ride. Flora wrapped her arms around his waist, feeling the solid warmth of him through his shirt. As they rode out of the camp, she looked back once at the place that had held her captive for 3 weeks. Then she turned her face forward, toward whatever future waited ahead. The journey to the Shepherd Ranch took 2 days. They traveled north through rugged terrain, following old cattle trails through valleys and over ridges. Dalton pointed out landmarks as they rode, teaching Flora to read the land. He showed her how to spot water sources by the vegetation, how to tell direction by the sun and stars, how to watch for signs of wildlife. They camped the first night beside a small creek. Dalton built a fire and cooked beans and bacon while Flora watched, feeling useless. I should be doing that. I am the cook, she said. You are a guest, not a servant. Besides, I have been cooking over campfires since I was a kid. I have got this. After they ate, they sat by the fire and watched the stars come out. The sky was clearer here than Flora had ever seen it, a vast expanse of black velvet studded with diamond points of light. It is beautiful, she breathed. This is what I love about the trail, Dalton said. Out here under these stars, all the problems of the world seem small. You can just be. Flora understood what he meant. She felt lighter out here, freer than she had in months, maybe even years. Dalton, can I ask you something? Anything? Why are you really doing all this? And please do not just say because it is the right thing to do. I need to understand what you want from me. Dalton was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. When he finally spoke, his voice was thoughtful and measured. I have spent most of my adult life moving from place to place, never settling, never putting down roots. I told myself it was because I loved the freedom, the adventure. And that was true to a point, but there was also something I was running from. What? Responsibility. Commitment. After my father died, I watched my mother struggle to keep our ranch going. I saw how hard she worked, how much she sacrificed. And I saw how my father's death broke something in her. For years, I was terrified of that kind of pain, of caring about someone or something so much that losing it could destroy me. He picked up a stick and poked at the fire. So I stayed on the move. I told myself I was happy, and I was in a way, but I was also lonely. And then I saw you at that camp, and something in me just knew. This is it. This is what you have been running from and running toward your whole life. But you do not even know me. I know enough. I know you are brave. I know you are strong. I know you did not let 3 weeks in that hellhole break your spirit. I know that when I talk to you, I feel like I can say anything and you will understand. I know that when I look at you, I see a future I never thought I wanted. He turned to meet her eyes. So yes, I am doing this because it is right, but I am also doing it because I am hoping, maybe foolishly, that you might feel even a fraction of what I feel when I look at you. Flora's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. I am scared. Of me. Of this. Of feeling something for someone I barely know. Of letting myself hope for something good and having it taken away. That is fair. I am scared too, but I think the best things in life are worth being scared for. Flora looked at him across the fire, at his honest face and sincere eyes, and made a decision. She stood up and walked around the fire to sit beside him. Then, before she could lose her nerve, she leaned in and kissed him. It was a soft kiss, tentative and sweet. Dalton froze for a heartbeat, then his hand came up to cup her cheek as he kissed her back. It was gentle and careful, a promise rather than a demand. When they broke apart, Flora was trembling. I am not good at this. I have never really been courted before. Neither have I, if I am honest. But I think we can figure it out together. They sat by the fire for hours, talking and occasionally stealing kisses. Flora learned that Dalton was ticklish behind his left ear, that he sang off-key when he thought no one was listening, that he had a scar on his shoulder from a longhorn that got spooked during a storm. He learned that Flora could recite poetry from memory, that she was afraid of spiders but not snakes, that she dreamed of one day having a house with a porch swing. When they finally bedded down for the night, Dalton made Flora take his bedroll while he slept closer to the fire. She protested, but he was insistent. You are a guest, he said firmly, and I am a gentleman, despite what the trail dust might suggest. Flora fell asleep feeling safer and more hopeful than she had in a very long time. The next day they rode through territory that grew progressively more beautiful. Rolling hills gave way to meadows dotted with wildflowers, and the mountains rose majesty and snow capped in the distance. This is all your family's land? Flora asked as they crossed a particularly beautiful valley. Some of it. We have about 500 acres, which is not huge by cattle ranch standards, but it is enough. My mother leases out some of it to other ranchers. The money keeps us going. As they crested a final ridge, Dalton pointed ahead. There, that is home. Flora looked down at her ranch nestled in a valley below. There was a main house, a barn, several outbuildings and corrals filled with horses. Smoke rose from the chimney, and Flora could see a figure working in what looked like a garden, her stomach clenched with nervousness. What if they do not like me? They will love you, trust me. As they rode into the yard, a woman emerged from the house. She was in her 50s, with Dalton's gray-blue eyes and dark hair streaked with silver. She wiped her hands on her apron and broke into a huge smile. Dalton, you are home. Dalton dismounted and swept his mother into a hug. Hi, Ma, I missed you. Not enough to come home more often, she scolded, but her tone was affectionate. Then she turned to Flora. And you must be the young lady he told me about. Flora, is it? Yes, madam. Flora Kimball. Thank you so much for allowing me to visit. Visit? Honey, you are welcome to stay as long as you like. Any friend of Dalton's is family here. She pulled Flora into a warm hug, and Flora felt tears prick at her eyes at the simple kindness. I am Dalton Shepherd, but you call me Dalton. Now come inside. You both must be starving. The house was warm and welcoming, with comfortable furniture and lace curtains. It smelled like bread and herbs, and Flora felt something in her chest relax. A young woman appeared from the back of the house. She was in her early 20s, with the same dark hair and striking eyes as Dalton. You must be Flora. I am Delilah, Dalton's sister. I have been dying to meet the woman who finally got my brother to bring someone home. Delilah, leave her alone, Dalton said, but he was smiling. She has had a rough few weeks. Let her settle in before you start interrogating her. Over lunch, Flora found herself relaxing as Dalton and Delilah drew her into easy conversation. They asked about her background without prying into painful subjects, made her laugh with stories about Dalton's childhood mishaps, and made it clear she was welcome. After lunch, Dalton showed Flora to a small bedroom on the second floor. This was Delilah's room before she moved into the larger one. It is not much, but it is clean and private. It is perfect, Flora said, looking around at the simple bed, dresser, and washstand. I cannot thank you enough for your hospitality. Nonsense. Dalton told me a bit about your situation. You have had a hard time, and everyone deserves a safe place to recover. Dalton squeezed Flora's hand. Now, I do not know what is happening between you and my son, and that is your business, but I want you to know that you are welcome here regardless. If you want to stay a week, stay a week. If you want to stay a year, stay a year. There is always work to be done on a ranch, and we could use the help. Consider this your home for as long as you need it. Flora felt tears spill over. You do not know how much that means to me. I think I do. I was young once, and I remember what it felt like to need help and be too proud to ask for it. So I am telling you now, you do not have to ask. It is already given. After Dalton left, Flora sat on the bed and let herself cry. They were not tears of sadness, but of relief and gratitude and hope. For the first time since her father's death, she felt like maybe, just maybe, things were going to be all right. Over the next few weeks, Flora settled into life on the Shepherd Ranch. She helped Dalton with cooking and cleaning, worked in the garden restoring it to its former glory, and learned the basics of ranch work from Delilah. She gathered eggs from the chickens, helped mend fences, and even learned to milk cows, and she spent time with Dalton. He had delayed his next cattle drive, telling his crew he would catch up with them in a few weeks. Flora knew he was staying because of her, and part of her felt guilty about it. But she was also grateful for the time together. They took long walks through the property, rode horses through the hills, and sat on the porch in the evenings watching the sun set. Dalton was patient and kind, never pushing her for more than she was ready to give. They talked about everything and nothing, sharing their hopes and fears and dreams. One evening, about a month after Flora arrived at the ranch, they sat by the creek that ran through the property. The air was crisp with the promise of winter, and the leaves on the trees had turned brilliant shades of gold and red. I have been thinking, Flora said, trailing her fingers through the cool water, about what I want to do with my life. And I want to stay here. If your mother really meant what she said about me staying as long as I want, I would like to stay permanently. I could work for my keep, help with the ranch. Dalton's face lit up. Ma would be thrilled, so would Delilah, and so would I. There is something else, Flora continued, her heart pounding. I have been thinking about us, about what this is between us. What do you think it is? I think I am falling in love with you. No, that is not right. I think I have already fallen in love with you. And that terrifies me because it happened so fast, and I do not know if that is real or if I am just grateful for everything you have done. Dalton turned to face her fully. Do you want to know what I think? Yes. I think love does not have a timeline. I think sometimes you meet someone and your soul just knows this is the one. I think I fell in love with you the moment I saw you carrying those water buckets with your head held high despite everything. And I think that every moment since then has only made me love you more. You love me. I love you, Flora Kimball. I love your strength and your courage. I love the way you sing when you work in the garden. I love how you cry during sunsets and laugh at my terrible jokes. I love everything about you, and I want to spend the rest of my life proving it. Flora felt like her heart might burst. I love you too. I do not know how it happened so fast, but I do. Dalton pulled her close and kissed her, and this time there was no hesitation, no uncertainty. This was a kiss full of promise and passion, and the future they would build together. When they finally broke apart, Dalton reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. I know this is crazy fast. We have only known each other 6 weeks. But I have never been more sure of anything in my life. He opened the box to reveal a simple gold band with a small diamond. Flora Kimball, will you marry me? Flora stared at the ring, then at Dalton's hopeful face. Every logical part of her brain screamed that this was too soon, too fast, too risky. But her heart knew better. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I will marry you. Dalton let out a whoop of joy and slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly as if it had been made for her. Then he picked her up and spun her around, both of them laughing like children. When they returned to the house hand in hand, Deanne took one look at Flora's face and let out her own whoop of joy. About time. Delilah, get the good whiskey, we are celebrating. You are not surprised? Flora asked. Honey, I knew the day Dalton brought you home that this was going to happen. I have never seen my son look at anyone the way he looks at you. Plus, he asked my permission to propose 3 days ago. You did? Flora looked at Dalton. Of course I did. Ma taught me to have some manners. They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony in Shoshone. Martha made the trip to attend, along with several of Dalton's drover friends and a few neighbors from surrounding ranches. Flora wore a simple white dress that Deanne had kept from her own wedding, altered to fit Flora's smaller frame. As Flora stood at the altar looking into Dalton's eyes, she thought about the journey that brought her here. 3 months ago, she had been sold to a railroad camp, her future bleak and hopeless, and then this man had walked into her life and changed everything. I love you, Dalton mouthed silently before the preacher began. I love you too, she mouthed back. The ceremony was short and sweet. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Dalton kissed Flora to enthusiastic applause. As they walked back down the aisle, Flora caught Martha's eye. The older woman was crying and she mouthed, I told you so. The reception was held at the ranch, with tables set up in the yard and more food than seemed possible. Dalton's drover friends were boisterous and funny, toasting the couple with embarrassing stories about Dalton's exploits on the trail. Deanne cried happy tears, and Delilah pulled Flora aside to whisper, Welcome to the family, sister. As the sun set and the party continued with music and dancing, Dalton pulled Flora away from the crowd. They walked to their favorite spot by the creek and sat in comfortable silence. Are you happy? Dalton asked. Happier than I ever thought possible. 3 months ago, I thought my life was over. Now I have a husband I love, a family who cares about me, and a home. It does not seem real. It is real, and it is just the beginning. Flora leaned her head on his shoulder. What happens now? Now we live our lives. I am going to take fewer drives, spend more time here at the ranch. We will work the land together, build a life together. Maybe start a family if you want. I want that, all of it." They sat there until the stars came out, making plans and dreaming dreams. And Flora realized that for the first time in her life, she was not afraid of the future. With Dalton by her side, she could face anything. The first year of their marriage was not without challenges. Dalton struggled to adjust to staying in one place, and there were times when Flora could see the restlessness in his eyes. But he never complained, and he worked harder than anyone on the ranch to make it thrive. Flora threw herself into learning everything she could about ranch life. She became skilled at riding, at managing the books, at breeding and raising chickens. The garden she and Diane tended became the envy of the county, producing more vegetables than they could use. They sold the surplus in Shoshone, creating a small but steady income stream. Delilah became Flora's closest friend. The two women spent hours talking and working together, and Flora finally understood what it meant to have a sister. When Delilah started courting a neighboring rancher's son, Flora helped her navigate the complexities of young love with advice born from her own experience. Diane's health began to decline slowly during that first year. Nothing serious, just the normal aches and pains of aging. But Flora noticed and quietly took on more of the household responsibilities, making sure Diane rested and did not overwork herself. The older woman was grateful, and the bond between them deepened. Midway through their second year of marriage, Flora realized she was pregnant. She told Dalton one evening as they sat on the porch they had built together that summer. "You are sure?" he asked, his eyes wide with wonder. "As sure as I can be. I have missed 2 cycles now, and I have been sick every morning for a week." Dalton let out a shout of joy and pulled her into his arms. "We are going to be parents, we are. Are you ready for this? I have never been more ready for anything in my life, except maybe marrying you." The pregnancy was not easy. Flora was sick for the first 4 months, barely able to keep food down. Diane and Delilah took care of her, making sure she rested and ate what she could. Dalton was attentive and worried, hovering over her like a mother hen until she finally told him to go work on the ranch before she lost her mind. But as the sickness passed and her belly began to swell, Flora felt a joy she had never experienced. She talked to the baby constantly, telling it stories about its father, about the ranch, about the family waiting to meet it. In late April of 1879, after 12 hours of labor, Flora gave birth to a healthy baby boy. They named him Daniel, after Dalton's father. He had his mother's dark hair and his father's storm cloud eyes, and from the moment Flora held him, she knew her heart would never be the same. Dalton cried when he first held his son, tears streaming down his face as he marveled at the tiny fingers and toes. "He is perfect. You are perfect." "I cannot believe I get to have this." "We get to have this," Flora corrected. "This is ours together." Diane was a doting grandmother, constantly offering advice and help. Delilah became Daniel's favorite aunt, singing to him and making him laugh with funny faces. The whole ranch seemed to revolve around the new baby, and Flora basked in the love surrounding her family. 2 years later, Flora gave birth to a daughter they named Delia Marie. She had her father's dark hair and her mother's stubborn chin, and she came into the world screaming her displeasure at being disturbed. From the beginning, Delia was a force of nature, curious and fearless. "She is going to keep us on our toes," Dalton said, watching his daughter take her first steps at 9 months old. Just like her father, Flora teased, life on the ranch fell into a comfortable rhythm. Dalton and Flora worked side by side managing the property, which had grown more profitable under their joint leadership. They expanded the cattle operation, bought more land, and built a schoolroom addition to the house so they could teach their children at home with help from Deanne. Delilah married her rancher's son in a beautiful ceremony that made Flora cry happy tears. She watched her sister-in-law become a wife and eventually a mother, and their children grew up playing together like siblings. Diane lived long enough to see all her grandchildren born. She passed peacefully in her sleep one winter night when Daniel was 6 and Delia was 4. The family mourned her loss deeply, but they took comfort in knowing she had spent her final years surrounded by the family she loved. Flora and Dalton added a third child 5 years after Delia, another boy they named David. He was quieter than his siblings, contemplative and thoughtful. He loved to read and would spend hours in the library Dalton had built, losing himself in books about far-off places. As the children grew, Flora often thought about the chain of events that brought her to this life. If her father had not died, if she had not been sold to that railroad camp, if Dalton had not ridden into camp that day, her life would have been completely different. Probably worse, almost certainly lonelier. One evening, as she and Dalton sat on their porch watching their children play in the yard, she voiced these thoughts. "Do you ever wonder what your life would be like if we had never met?" she asked. Dalton was quiet for a moment. "I would still be driving cattle, I suppose, moving from place to place, never settling, probably lonely even if I did not realize it. I would probably still be at that camp, or worse. Do not think about that. You are here and that is all that matters. I know. I just feel grateful, that is all. For you, for this life, for our family. Sometimes it seems too good to be true." Dalton took her hand. "It is not too good. It is exactly what we built together. You escaped a terrible situation and made something beautiful out of it. That is not luck, Flora. That is strength and courage and choosing to believe in hope even when everything looked hopeless. I could not have done it without you. And I could not have done any of this without you. We are a team." Flora leaned her head on his shoulder, watching the sun set behind the mountains. Daniel was teaching Delia how to rope a fence post, and David sat nearby reading a book. Their life was not perfect. There were still hard days, still challenges to overcome. But it was real, and it was theirs, and Flora would not trade it for anything. As the years passed, the Shepherd Ranch became known as one of the most successful operations in the territory. But more than that, it became known as a place of refuge. Flora never forgot what it felt like to be desperate and alone, and she and Dalton opened their home to others in need. They hired drifters who needed work, took in women fleeing bad situations, and provided temporary homes for children who had nowhere else to go. Some stayed for a few days, others for months or years. Some became permanent parts of their extended family. One autumn evening, when Flora was in her early 50s and Dalton was nearing 60, they sat together on their porch as they had done thousands of times before. Their children were grown now. Daniel ran the cattle operation with his father, Delia had married and lived on a neighboring ranch with her own children, and David was teaching at the school they had built in Shoshone. "We did good, did not we?" Dalton said, his hair now more silver than dark. "We did," Flora agreed. Her hands were weathered from years of work, but they were strong and capable. "We built something that will last beyond us. Do you ever regret anything? Marrying so fast, staying here, any of it?" Flora turned to look at her husband, at the man who had saved her and let her save him in return. The man who had given her a family, a home, a purpose. The man who still made her heart flutter when he smiled. "Not for a single moment," she said. "You gave me a life I never dreamed possible. You gave me a home when all I knew was wandering. I think we saved each other." "I think you are right." As the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and purple. Flora thought about the girl she had been at 22, being sold to a railroad camp with no hope for the future. That girl would never have believed this life was possible. Would never have imagined that the cowboy who bought her freedom would become her husband, the father of her children, her partner in building something lasting and good. But here she was, 50 years old and surrounded by a life full of love and purpose. The journey had not been easy, but every step had been worth it. "I love you," Flora said, taking Dalton's weathered hand in hers. "I love you too. Always have, always will." They sat together as the stars began to appear. Two people who had found each other against all odds and built a life worth living. And as the night grew dark and the crickets sang their evening songs, Flora felt nothing but gratitude for the day a cowboy rode into a railroad camp and changed her life forever. The ranch continued to thrive for many more years. Flora and Dalton eventually handed over day-to-day operations to Daniel, though they remained active advisors well into their 70s. They spent their later years tending the garden, playing with their grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and sitting on that porch they both loved so much. When Dalton passed away at the age of 79, Flora grieved deeply but found comfort in their children and the legacy they had built together. She lived another 5 years, spending her time teaching her great-grandchildren to garden, telling them stories about their grandfather, and making sure they understood the importance of kindness and helping others. Flora Shepherd died peacefully in her sleep at the age of 84, surrounded by family in the house she and Dalton had built together. At her funeral, which drew people from across 3 territories, Daniel stood to give the eulogy. "My mother was sold to a railroad camp when she was 22 years old," he began. "She could have let that break her, could have let bitterness and despair consume her, but instead, she met a cowboy who saw her strength and offered her a chance. Together, they built not just a ranch but a family, a community, and a legacy of compassion that continues to this day." He paused, looking around at the hundreds of people gathered. "Many of you are here because at some point my parents helped you. They gave you work when you needed it, shelter when you had nowhere else to go, hope when everything seemed hopeless. That was who they were. They never forgot where they came from, and they never stopped reaching back to help others up." After the service, as family and friends shared stories and memories, a woman in her 60s approached Daniel. He recognized her as Sarah, one of the first women his parents had helped decades ago. "Your mother saved my life," Sarah said simply. "I was running from a bad situation, and I ended up at your door by accident. Your mother took one look at me and said, 'Come on in, honey. You are safe now.' I stayed for 6 months, and in that time she taught me how to be strong, how to believe in myself again. Everything good in my life came from that moment." It was just one of dozens of similar stories shared that day. Flora and Dalton Shepherd had touched so many lives, changed so many futures. Their love story had started with an act of compassion in a railroad camp, and it had rippled outward for decades, creating waves of hope and healing that would continue long after they were gone. Daniel stood at his mother's grave site as the sun set, his own children and grandchildren beside him. He thought about the story his mother had told him countless times, about the day a cowboy rode into a railroad camp and bought her freedom before the work whistle ever blew. About how that one act of kindness had changed not just 2 lives but hundreds. "We will keep it going, Ma," he said quietly. "The ranch, the legacy, the helping others. We will make sure your story is never forgotten." And they did. The Shepherd Ranch remained in the family for generations, a testament to the power of love, compassion, and 2 people who found each other at exactly the right moment. Flora's garden continued to bloom every spring, tended by her descendants who made sure it never fell into disrepair. The porch where she and Dalton spent countless evenings was preserved and strengthened, becoming a gathering place for family celebrations and quiet moments of reflection. In the town of Shoshone, a historical marker was eventually placed near the old railroad campsite. It told the story of Flora Kimball and Dalton Shepherd, of how their love story began in hardship and grew into something beautiful that impacted an entire community. Tourists would stop to read it, to marvel at the idea of a cowboy who bought a woman's freedom and fell in love with her, of a woman who turned the worst moment of her life into the foundation for something extraordinary. But the real memorial to Flora and Dalton was not in historical markers or preservation efforts. It was in the lives they touched, the people they helped, the love they shared and spread to everyone around them. It was in the children who grew up hearing their story and learned that one person's kindness can change the world. It was in the tradition of helping others that continued through their descendants for generations. Flora had been sold to a railroad camp, her future bleak and her hope nearly gone. But a cowboy bought her out before the whistle ever blew, and in doing so, he bought them both a future filled with love, purpose, and a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. It was a love story born in hardship, built on trust and courage, and sustained by the simple decision to believe in each other even when the world gave them every reason not to. And that, perhaps, was the greatest testament to their love. Not that it was easy or perfect, but that it was real and chosen and strong enough to change not just two lives but the world around them. Flora and Dalton Shepherd proved that love, true love, has the power to transform darkness into light, despair into hope, and a single moment of compassion into a legacy that echoes through time. Their story became legend in Idaho Territory and beyond, told and retold around campfires and dinner tables. It was romanticized and simplified, as such stories often are. But at its core remained the truth. A woman in desperate need, a man with the courage to help, and the love that blossomed between them despite impossible odds. And so the story ended not with sadness but with celebration. Celebration of a life well lived, of love well shared, of a legacy that would continue to inspire long after the last person who knew them personally had passed away. Flora and Dalton Shepherd's love story was complete, a beautiful circle from that first moment in a railroad camp to the peaceful endings they both found in the home they built together. It was a reminder that even in the darkest moments, hope can be found. That one person's courage can change another person's life. That love, real and true, can overcome any obstacle and build something lasting and beautiful. And that sometimes, just sometimes, the worst moment of your life can lead to the best thing that ever happens to you. The sun set over the Idaho mountains one final time on this story, painting the sky in shades of gold and purple, just as it had done thousands of times during Flora and Dalton's life together. And in that beautiful light, their legacy shone bright and enduring, a testament to the power of love, courage, and the simple human kindness that had started it all on that day when a cowboy rode into a railroad camp and changed everything.